What up, guys? Today on the podcast, Eugene and I are going to go over 5 changes that made a big impact in my jiu-jitsu. The lessons, you've probably heard them before because I talk about them, but we'll go in depth in each one that we go into. And there are also lessons that have, in a lot of cases, escaped just the mats and invaded my life off the mats as well, as I'm sure many of you guys have. You've found that if you've been training long enough, martial arts, not just jiu-jitsu, but if you've trained just different martial arts, those things, the lessons and the things you deal with tend to have an effect off the mat, right? I think we all kind of agree on that. And, these lessons that I'll share with you have definitely done that as well for me. So we'll jump into those in just a second. Again, before we get started, thanks to our sponsors that help make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web, if you guys have never checked them out before, go to their website at charlottesweb.com. They're a CBD company, obviously. We've talked about them before. It's CBD that I use personally. I like taking my CBD at night as part of my sort of nighttime routine to sort of wind down and chill out. They've got several new products that are coming up. And again, one of the products that they have that may be interesting to some of you guys is one. If you go to their website, charlesweb.com, you can check out the product called Recreate. What that is it's a broad spectrum hemp extract, which is basically the CBD product, right? But what's interesting is it's endorsed by the Major League Baseball Association, and it's basically created for people whom, if they are being tested for different things, you'd have to look at the situation and do your research on it to make sure. I don't know what type of testing you have, but the idea is that they make a CBD that has such a low amount of THC involved in it that this way people won't test positive for things like that. So if you're someone that does get tested regularly and you've wanted to use CBD, but you were worried about pissing hot, right? Then the Recreate product could be useful for you. Just do your research on it. And they have a whole line of other products that you guys may be interested in, everything from gummies, tinctures, everything else. So check them out at charlesweb.com. And if you guys want to save 20%, use a promo code Chewjitsu20 for 20% off. Also, thanks to our sponsor, Epic Roll, epicrollbjj.com. If you guys have never been to their website, I encourage you to give it a look. If you go on the website, you'll see everything from t-shirts, rash guards, gis, no-gi shorts, gear bags. I mean, everything that you can think of that you would need for jiu-jitsu. Cool designs, high quality stuff, all available to you. And again, if you want to get a 15% off on your order, just use the promo code Jiu-Jitsu for 15% off at checkout. And guys, if you are interested in supporting the podcast directly, you can do so by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Upon joining, you'll get access to an exclusive library of content we've created, and you'll get a few other perks involved with that as well. Again, all you got to do is go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And guys, if you'd like to join my Chew Crew email list where I send out a daily email to people, you can get it at chujitsu.net/join, JOIN. Upon joining, you'll get access to some exclusive free ebooks that I give away, and then you'll get my daily email. And then if at any point, if you want to unsubscribe, you can do so. So with that said, guys, let's jump into it. These tips, as I said, they have helped me on and off the mats. But again, I always think about this. Someone was like, asked me, they said, how did jiu-jitsu change your life as a person? And it's so hard to say because I became an adult on the mats, right? I was 18 years old, I was 17 years old when I first started training jiu-jitsu. So, no, I was 18, excuse me. I started training in May of 2003. So I was 18 years old when I began, and I literally became an adult on the mat. And I think it's one of those things where martial arts and jiu-jitsu for us, they provide lessons that you could have learned elsewhere. But for us, martial arts tends to be a very useful way to gain them. So we'll jump into it. These are in no specific order. I'm just telling them to you as they come to me. But the first one was learning to embrace failure. So we all say that, right? Learning to embrace failure in training. We all talk about that. We understand that it's useful, but at the same time, it doesn't make it any easier. And one of my biggest struggles up until like my purple belt, brown belt time, which if you want to equate that into years, was around about 4 to 5 years. was losing. I hated losing. And even worse than the loss or losing, like when I say losing, I mean just getting submitted by anyone in training. Even worse than the actual sort of getting frustrated by that was my negative self-talk. I would, tell myself, you suck.
Hmm.
Why did you think you were this good anyway? That kind of thing. Um, which you have to be careful about. Whenever you have that negative self-talk, you have to really think about where that came from. Nobody nobody talks to themselves like that inherently. They talk to themselves like that because it's been conditioned. They've been conditioned to, right? Someone, maybe your dad, maybe your uncle, maybe a coach told you something like that, and then it seeped into your brain, and so then you start talking to yourself like
Hmm.
that. If someone was never talked to like that, they would not sort of they would not have that kind of self talk to themselves. But again, this whole thing was going on. Now, I eventually got out of that. I still dislike losing, but it happens. Plus, losing is par for the course, and losing only happens when you push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And I think I heard it. Well, what is it? Someone said that, and I've said this before on the podcast. I think failure is the luxury of the active, right? If you're not doing anything, then you're not going to fail. But if you're doing something, you're going to fail. It's going to happen. And again, I think that has also been really useful, like off the mats in a myriad of different ways. Obviously, we can think about it from the business standpoint. Like, you try new things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. You can let it bury you, or you can learn from it and get better, right? It's simple things like that. But again, for me, the way that it happened was it started off when I was my purple belt, brown belt phase. My coaches were telling me, like, you're getting good, but you weren't. They were telling me you're not using anything new. You're not doing anything different. You're the same guy that you were like a year ago, and you're not expanding your game, which they saw as a bad thing, which it was. And I told them, I was like, I don't want to lose. And they kind of laugh, like, you're not losing, like you're training, practice stuff. And I had to go through this dip going from purple into brown belt,
Yep.
where my game initially got a little bit worse, and then it got better afterwards. And again, so by embracing that, the failures and those little losses and getting beaten by other people like lower belts and stuff like that, it made my game a lot better, because then you can play a lot more freely with your game. You can try new stuff out. And you're not so worried about what's going to happen afterwards, what's the result, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think I think we go through that at the very beginning, not embracing, like accepting that we're not going to be good at something. Like as a white
Sure.
belt, you kind of accept that, and I don't want people to, I think, get it confused that accepting loss or just understanding that you're losing, but then embracing it and using it as a, because I think as a white belt, most of us are like, shit, I hate losing. I hate it so much. And you do everything in your power and you fight tooth and nail to not lose. And then you get to where you're not losing on a consistent basis. You're probably getting, most of the time you're getting the better of the exchanges, but then you don't evolve, right? And then so then you got to go through that learning experience again of like, all right, I got to try some new things. And you're right. I think like the gym culture, like not tapping and talking is a big thing that allows for
Hmm.
people to, like you said, embrace losing or failure, because not really failure, it is like it's practice. You're kind of, it's the lab, you're figuring it out, and you kind of, as long as you're in an environment where nobody else is going to say you suck because you got tapped or whatever. Everybody taps, everybody loses from time to time, everybody gets submitted, but that's part of the process. I learned, like I said, I've said it before, I learned so much more from my losses than I do from my wins. I think wins are obviously more enjoyable, and they give you a good boost. You feel good about yourself, but when you lose, it kind of truly makes you reflect, and you got to figure out, you got to go back to the lab, and you have things to work on. I sometimes I don't enjoy, but like a loss will give you like a direction to move forward in your jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, and you hit on something that I didn't have planned, but it's a good idea, or something good to bring up. When we come into jiu-jitsu initially, and this is true for pretty much anything when we're brand new to it, we accept that we're not going to be good at it. We might come in with these grand ideas that we're going to be amazing at it, but we quickly learn that that's not the case, and we accept that we're not going to be very good. And then what happens is eventually we get up to a little bit, we get a little success, right? We get like a little something going for ourselves.
Yeah.
And it becomes dangerous. And this is, I think they say nothing fails like success or something like that, right? So because when you become successful, then a lot of things can happen, right? Where one, you could become complacent, right? Because why do you want to learn anything new or try anything new? What you have right now is working. And then also too, you become fearful because now you have something to lose. When you first came in, you had nothing. You were just like this brand new guy, girl who just sucked. And of course you had no
Yep.
expectations of yourself. You had no rank. You're just there. But now you have and again, this is all ego stuff, right? You get up to, let's say you get a couple stripes in your belts. Maybe your gym doesn't do belts or stripes, but you win a couple competitions and you're kind of seen as one of the people that are getting really, really good at that lower rank group, that lower experience group. And so now you have something in your head that you have to lose, right? Your reputation, your feeling of self-worth now, because if you lose, then you're going to feel bad about yourself, right? And so then we get into a little success and then we don't want to open up anymore. We lose that acceptance. And again, acceptance, right? Tolerating, that doesn't mean you like it, right? I'm not saying I hate it, right? Because it's like taking a bitter medicine, right? I don't I don't hate like I don't hate the bitter medicine. I just take it because I know I need to.
Mhm.
Accepting that, right? Um, I can like for instance, even like when you think about the way that people are to one another, I don't have to accept really, or excuse me, I can accept the way that you are. I can tolerate the way that you wish to live your life, like in America. Doesn't mean I have to like it, but
Right.
but I can tolerate it. I can say, you know what, you go do your thing, I'll do my thing. That's the idea, right? Tolerance doesn't mean that I gotta love it,
Nope.
right? And that I want to push it on someone else. And I think that sometimes you can think about it. We don't have to love losing. It's not like when I lose a match, I'm like, oh boy, this is great. I just accept it. But there's this issue a lot of times where once we do get a little bit better, we lose that what they would call beginner's mindset, and we're
Yeah.
like, I got something now. I'm somewhere. I got on the top of this little hill, and I'm afraid to go to the next hill because I might fall down. So I'll just stay here for a
Yep.
while.
Yep. It's normal. Like it feels good to win. Feels good to be successful. But you got to go down to that level to keep yourself I don't know, give yourself a little bit of a I don't know, keep bring it back to reality a little bit. Also, it's good to lose. It's good to
Mhm.
lose once in a while. Keeps you sharp.
Another thing that helped make my jiu-jitsu game better, and this will be the second tip that I'll give you guys, second idea that was really useful to me, was learning to enjoy playing off my back. So basically, as many of you probably know, being a wrestler, when you get into jiu-jitsu, it's a little bit of a tough thing. Initially, when I got into jiu-jitsu, I wanted nothing to do with playing the guard, playing off my back. My my thought to myself was that I would simply put my feet on someone's hips, kick them away, and get up to my feet and wrestle. Now, I was not the best wrestler, so I didn't really think this through very well. Mind you, I'm 18 years old. And again, it didn't work. And when I would compete or when I would roll, if I got put on my back, I was done. I was cooked. And it wasn't until I went to a seminar where the a guy named Pablo Popovich, was showing some really cool guard stuff like butterfly guard and daily Hiva guard, stuff that was really, in 2003 was kind of cool for the times. It was at that point that I was like, whoa, this is really neat. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with it. It doesn't have to be this really static, boring position, right?
Yeah.
And so it was after that I started being really interested in playing the guard. And also, too, my coach put me on my back for 3 months and made me start every match, on my back. And I hated it
Yeah.
until I didn't. And then I started playing off my back and I started having fun with it and enjoying it. And then at that point, that gave me a couple different things. One is that when I would start rolling with the guard players, I knew what they were doing. And so this landscape that was essentially completely foreign to me was now very like well mapped. I knew exactly when they grabbed my arm, I knew they were going for an arm bar, so I had to defend it. If they were going for a sweep, I knew they were going for a sweep. And then also too, it allowed my guard passing and my game in general just to get better because if I got put on my back, I wasn't afraid. And again, fear creates tension in your body. Fear creates rigidity. And when you're in a sport where you're having to be mobile and fast and agile, you can't be rigid. And even if you're physically loose and good, if mentally you're rigid and you can't take the chances to go for the opportunities as they show themselves, then you're not going to be very, very successful, or you may be successful to a degree, but you'll always be less than what you know is in you. And that was a case with me for a long time. The more that I learned to be comfortable everywhere, not just in off my back, and you could take this lesson elsewhere, but the more I became comfortable with all of my weak areas by, building them up a little bit, the more loose and free that I was, because I wasn't fearful of any position. I could play everywhere. And so that's a really important thing. If there is a place in jiu-jitsu, a place in your game that you feel fearful, that's where you need to go, because you need to get rid of that fear, because it'll allow you to play better everywhere else. And it reminds me of Ralph Waldo Emerson had a quote from one of his essays saying something to the effect of, you do the thing and you get the power, right? So basically, whatever freaks you out, you do that thing, and then by doing that thing, you gain power from it, right? And a lot of times, move towards your fear, as long as it's not something that's life-threatening, is generally a good idea.
So I will come at this idea from the opposite angle, as someone that did not wrestle, did not have that, ended up on his back a lot more, that I started jiu-jitsu basically in the guard. That was where I was comfortable, holding somebody in the guard. So for me, it was like learning some stand-up, learning some wrestling, learning some takedowns that I could do, that I could effectively, not avoiding the stand-up aspect of jiu-jitsu, because that's every match starts on the feet. So starting from the feet, not avoiding that, learning some takedowns, learning some, okay, if I want to get somebody into my guard, some effective guard pulls or some little throws, things like that. But that's something I think it's valuable for if you're someone that comes into jiu-jitsu without a wrestling background, work on your wrestling. I mean, because you're going to know how to counter wrestle, how to defend takedowns. You're going to know how to do some of those things that are valuable. So that way, if you do get taken down, you have a good idea on how to retain guard or get in a good position. So you're not just getting your guard pass right off the bat. So for me, doing some stand-up, some wrestling is something that I needed to do more, end up on top more, because I was more comfortable on the bottom playing, closed guard, open guard type stuff on my back. So I really think use that idea. If you're someone that's purely a jiu-jitsu person with no wrestling background, do the inverse of it and learn some takedowns and work your wrestling. I think it's a good idea to do that.
All right. And I mean, it's a good idea, again, going to those places where you're weak, where you have some fear, where you're nervous about, it's a good idea. The next tip I'll share with you guys, the third one, will be learning to enjoy drilling. Again, it's one of these things where we know that drilling techniques is a good idea. It just doesn't mean that everybody takes advantage of it. It's like diet. Most of us know that not eating tons of chocolate, sugar, and junk food and everything else is a good idea, but then we do it anyway, right? We eat it. So I don't, but a lot of people eat it, right? So again, it's one of these things where sometimes the best information isn't the most complicated. Sometimes it's very, very simple. Everybody's looking for crazy like hacks or something, and looking for some like weird way to biohack their body or something. It's like, oh, have you slept for 8 hours a day, or like go to sleep earlier in the day or something? I mean, there's all kinds of simple ideas, but learning to drill, it's a really simple one. And it's one of these things where we did it in wrestling. For whatever reason, when I got to jiu-jitsu, I didn't do a ton of it because I was young and we were rolling a lot. So I loved rolling. Rolling's fun. It's like the dessert of training, right? And then I remember going and training with who my coach is now, Sean. And at the time, Sean was just pumping out multiple Pan Am champions at different weight classes, different belt levels. And so I was down there with him training for a week, just trying to see what I could absorb. And I remember that like one of the things that they did is they would drill techniques a lot. So they would do lots of reps, and they would just get lots and lots of reps. And I noticed that when I came back to roll just the next week, some of those techniques that I had drilled were working because I'd been drilling them all week down there and we were just getting lots of reps in. And so I was like, oh, this is a good idea. So that was something that I changed in the way that I taught, the way that I trained. It's something where like when I teach, a lot of times I like to give people, at least depending on the complexity of the technique, anywhere from 10 to even in some cases 20 minutes to drill time for a technique, so that they get ample time to actually drill the technique. But then sometimes I'll go to gyms and just like, to when I'm traveling or something, and it'll be, we have enough time to drill the technique 2 or 3 times, then we're learning something new.
Yeah.
And it feels so weird to me because I'm thinking to myself, there's no way anybody has a good grip on this technique. We just got our hands dirty and it's not nearly enough time. And so the more that you can be okay with drilling, the more you will be rewarded. Yes, it's going to be monotonous. Yes, it can be kind of boring, but there's something too if you can do it long enough, you'll find that the techniques start to get really sharp. You'll find that your efficiency with them gets sharp. Your ability to do them effectively with using less energy gets sharp. And even the idea that at least for me, when I'm able to do a technique and do it so almost automatically that I'm actually able to think about every little part of my body, that makes me excited because I know at that point the technique's getting better and better. Because, like, for instance, when you do a technique initially, you're just doing the macro part, the big movements, right?
Right.
And then once you get the big movements down, then you can get down into the micro level,
Yeah.
to make fun of that meme that was out a
Micro
couple years ago, micro
adjustments.
adjustments, right? Because what happens is once the big movements are down, that's when you can start to think about where body placement is in certain areas. And this is where, when you talk to a lot of black belts who have been training for a long time, if you talk to them and ask them about particular movements that they do, you might find that the movements or the techniques that they're doing, but they'll have this little adjustment. They'll say, "Hey, move your hand over 2 inches here. Put your foot like 3 inches this way." And you think about it and you see small adjustments, but then you feel the difference and you think to yourself, "Oh my God, this is amazing. This is so much different than what I was doing. Why didn't I think about this sooner?" That's something a lot of us say when we learn like one of those little pieces of wisdom from a very experienced black belt or experienced jiu-jitsu practitioner or grappler. We think, why didn't I think of this? This was so
Mhm.
simple. But again, that happens a lot of times once you've gotten so much time with a technique or a position that then you can start to think about these very tiny little adjustments because you're able to have a stronger intuition there. And so my encouragement to you is learn how to drill techniques more often, and you'll be rewarded with sharp, efficient skills.
Yep. I agree with drilling wise, like time for drilling and time for technique. So I run, 6 a.m. class on Friday mornings, and it's a class where you come in, we're there for an hour. So we don't have a ton of time. So we're spending at least 30, 35 minutes drilling specifically, and it's all a progressive kind of, it all builds off of it. So here's the basic entry, then we're working on, depend on what it is.
Sure.
And then, part of drilling doesn't have to be just drilling. It's starting that position or doing positional work from that position that you're in. So it could be pass defend. At least you're getting people a little bit of live progressive like stress. You're giving them stress, gradually increasing it. And that kind of shows, I think we were doing leg lasso position, and it's kind of new to some people because some people don't do as much gi now. It's so crazy how that switched, by the way. It used to be
Mhm. I
mostly
know.
gi, now it's mostly no gi. But we'll alternate gi and no gi days just because some people, I want them to be exposed to both. And so we're just working that position, and then you start them off in a pass defend round and just kind of increase the stress and see what they do under increased stress. And that's a great way to kind of help solidify those techniques as well, because sometimes you drill it and then you go and do open rounds and you're completely like just go back to doing what you were doing. So it's good to like almost like review in an active setting. A little bit more of active setting I think helps. So as far as me doing those classes, we have a very short amount of time, and I want people to get active drilling and then active kind of exposure to those techniques. So I think the positional stuff is part of that drilling, which is so important. It makes it a little more fun too, because then you're like, oh man, it worked, or oh, this didn't work, or I shut that down. And so it kind of gives you some live feedback. And I think it's part of the whole kind of the spectrum of that drilling of a technique.
For sure. And that's a good idea to do. So next tip that I would give you guys, again, another idea. It's similar to the first one, but slightly different with what we'll talk about, is not being worried about the outcome as much as the effort. So obviously kind of similar to accepting failure. But I think of it this way. One of the reasons why when I compete, I have a fairly high rate of success with submissions. I have a high rate of submissions is because, and it wasn't always this way, by the way. My submission rate didn't used to be so high. It got higher because it's a weird place to be. I don't really care if I win or lose that much. I've had countless wins, countless losses. I've won a lot more than I've lost, but still I've had countless of both. And I desperately want to win. But if I lose, you're not going to see me running around, throwing a fit or whatever. I'll just get up, shake the guy's hand. All right, that was that. It's okay. No big deal. And I don't feel any sort of disgust with myself after losing. I just go in back and like I lost a match at the Worlds in the semifinals or the quarterfinals of the no, it was the semifinals of the open weight. And I remember going back and looking at it and figuring out what I was doing wrong. And I watched it. I didn't watch it with disgust for myself, negative self-talk. I was like, what did the guy do? Because at the end of the day, the effort is really what's most important to me. I've had matches that I won where I was disgusted with myself because of how I won. I knew I could do way more. I just didn't. I just like held back because I was too afraid. And that bothered me more. That bothered me more that I was afraid to go for something. I was more worried about like, what are people going to think? What's my coach going to think? What am I going to think afterwards? I just want to win so desperately because I wanted some sort of validation that I was good at something, and that's really what it comes down to. But at a certain point, I won plenty of matches, won plenty of medals. You realize it doesn't really matter that much. What mattered to me the most was at the end of the day, how did I do during those matches? How did I do during those wins and those losses? And I have several losses that I think they made great matches, and I was really excited about them. Yes, I didn't win, but man, I did everything that I could, and it made for a good match. And I threw, the whole every technique that I knew at the time, I threw at them, and I just wasn't good enough to beat them that day. And on those matches, I'm still pretty satisfied with myself. And so, I think it's one of these things that we again, you can come to these in different ways. But I don't want to look back on anything that I've done and know that I could have done more. And so my opinion, the outcome is less important than the effort. The effort is the most important thing. And if you can get into that kind of place, it puts you into a unique mindset when you compete, when you roll, or when you're doing just about anything, where you do things 100%, you lay it all out there. But at the same time, if it doesn't go your way, you don't let it eat at you too much, because again, the effort that you put into it is what matters most to you, because at the end of the day, the effort is all you can really control.
Mm-hmm. Man, you said something, and it sticks out to me to this day, and it's something I always deal with: validation, right? Feeling validated, like wanting, I don't know, wanting your coaches to be proud of you, and like feeling like you're a good representative of the gym and your belt level and your belt rank and all that stuff. And also you're showing yourself in a way that people look up to in some instances, pretty important.
Sure.
But like, I think it starts from yourself. You have to like feel, I don't know. It's something I've always kind of feeling validated, or like, I think it's got to come internally. We seek it
Of
externally a
course.
lot of times, but I think it has to start internally. Like, you're satisfied that you feel that you're good, or you feel like that you're worth your belt rank or whatever it is. Because sometimes we don't. Sometimes we go through the people that may walk up to you and they may say, Chewy, I don't want this next belt. I don't feel like I'm ready, or this or that. And it's usually it's not their choice. Obviously, if you feel they're ready for that belt, it's time to get it. But like that's something we all struggle with. Something I struggle with
Everyone struggles with
all
it.
the time. And it's like, you want to hear that. Like, sometimes you want to hear that so badly that someone says, oh, you're good at this thing. And maybe you don't hear that, or you don't get it enough.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and maybe is never enough, because you're constantly wanting to hear that validation. But if you don't believe it yourself, all the external validation is not going to bring you to that point where you feel like you're worth that. So
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where for me, I sort of gained this idea of like this idea after I had won stuff, because you win some stuff and you win it, and you kind of start thinking to yourself, okay, so what now? Do I just keep chasing this because I want someone to tell me that I'm good? I mean, of course I am. Look what I've done. Of course I'm good. There's nothing, nobody can take that away from me. Like I'm good. All right, what now? You know what I mean? And then and then for me, at least at that point, I started competing for different reasons. But there's so many things that people do, and it's not just jiu-jitsu competitions. I mean, even trying to have, like young guys, I feel like a lot of times it's like they try to have relationships with women, flings, we'll say, we'll keep this PG, and lots of them to validate themselves, to validate themselves as men. It's a crapshoot. I think it's a terrible thing that we get taken over by, because at the end of the day, it's not as rewarding as a long, like, healthy, strong relationship. At least in my opinion. I've had both. I've done both and whatever. And again, it was one of those things where it was a validation thing. We try to, at least, and I have no idea what it's like for women. I only have a guy's perspective. Guys they'll buy these expensive cars, they'll buy these different things. Some people really like them. Sure, that's fine. Some people, like, they have the money and they can buy a car, and they can go buy a really nice car, and it doesn't impact their life in any negative way. But you see plenty of young guys who buy stuff they should not buy, expensive houses or cars or whatever, and it's trying to validate themselves. Like, look at me, look what I've done, And again, it's one of these things where, as you said, validation can come from only yourself, from internally. I mean, I think you still have to do something. You still have to become good at something. You can't just, like, say, well, I'm good because I've done absolutely nothing. I think you still have to push yourself in order to become worthy of being validated, even to yourself, right?
Yeah.
But only you can give yourself that validation that sort of completes yourself. Otherwise, if you're looking to it from other people, it's always going to be a bit empty, or at least it'll be very ephemeral. It'll pop up for a little bit. Sure, here's a little bit of validation, and it's gone, right? And so I think that's something that was useful for jiu-jitsu, because, again, I did a lot of this stuff with jiu-jitsu. Like, I made a lot of the mistakes that I was just telling people about. Bought a car, bought a house that I mostly couldn't afford, and it led to me to sort of reevaluate what I was doing things for in the first place, because it was taking away from the actual dreams that I had, which involved jiu-jitsu. So,
and maybe in some instances you have to go that route a little bit. You have to try that, like, almost test the waters. And see that, hey, this is not it. Like, you'll get there eventually, whether it's with the significant other or whatever. Like, if you're like to frequent with many ladies, I mean, I think that
I love how cute we're trying to be.
You know what I'm saying? The thing is that, like, it gives you a certain, there's no depth to it. It's very superficial, like, as opposed to, like, somebody really knowing you and seeing you when you're not, like, at your best, seeing you when you're kind of at your pissy, dumpy, kind of angry or whatever. Like, when you're not feeling good, you're not here's my presentation to the world. Like, when you're kind of at sometimes your lowest, or whatever, that, that can mean a variety of things for different people. But, like, when somebody accepts you in that capacity, or validates you, like, hey, I still love you. You're still this person that, I still think of you as this person. I won't say good or bad, but, I see you in a positive light.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times is that's where the relationship wise, having a partner that is that, you connect with on many different levels, that they don't just see this, because it's always, like, for show initially, right? It's like peacocking, right? Like, having our feathers out, wearing our nice shirt and whatever, and wearing our rhinestone t-shirt, just to only get you so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you have a relationship with someone that, like you said, you've seen every different iteration of you, and they're like, no, this is good for me. I mean, it's a big thing. And, honestly, even to be able to show a person every iteration of you, you have to be very secure in yourself, because, like you said, when we first meet people, we try to hide everything, right?
Sure we do.
And then we, like, let it out later on. But even being able to just be yourself, it's super hard. It's a better way to do things, because then people actually know what they're getting into. And if you don't like the way that yourself is, you can always change that. But again, it's just one of those things. And I think, you touched on something, that you're saying that we have to experience these things many times for us to really learn the lesson. I think that's true. And that's kind of a martial arts lesson, right? Martial arts is, you can't learn the lessons of martial arts intellectually, right? It's like, for instance, I could show you a technique. You could look at it. You could hear me lecture for an hour talking about it intellectually in the mind. But until it gets into the body, until you have experience with it, it means nothing, right? And we understand this from martial arts. We understand that experience is huge. Getting your hands dirty, your feet wet, diving in there, feeling the difference, right? It's like one of those things where think about the first time you guys listening, think about the first time you watched jiu-jitsu being displayed. Maybe you saw it back in 1993 with Hoist Gracie in the UFC. Maybe you saw it another time, right? And you saw it and you looked at it, but you hadn't felt it yet.
Mhm.
And you're like, huh, that's interesting. Maybe you thought you would do well, like I did. Maybe you thought you'd do terribly, right? Maybe you, who knows, right? But then you got in there and you experienced it, you felt it. And it was like, pew, your mind was awakened, your body was awakened to this experience. And I think that's one of the beautiful lessons that martial arts teaches us, right? It's this experiential sort of learning, this experiential sort of thing. We live in a modern society in the West where it's all heady. It's very heady, right? Like we talk about stuff, talk about ideas, information's abundant. But having that actual physical, tactile sensation associated with it, your intuition associated with that learning, it's so much different. And it's one of those things where it's hard to explain. It's hard to teach someone else. It almost makes me think of like, and again, I don't want to get too esoteric with it, but when you listen to like Zen teachers talk about helping people find enlightenment, right? It's one of these things where they have them do things, but you can't, you can talk about it, but you're like, you have to find it. I can only show you a path, but you have to experience it.
Correct.
I can't turn that light on for you. And I think a lot of times that's the way that it is. Like when I'm doing a video, I usually encourage someone to go do something because I know it's like, look, I can't just talk about this. I'm going to give you an idea. Now, my encouragement is for you to go do something because that is how you actually learn. That's how you gain the wisdom that you're seeking. That's how you gain it. It's not from just talking about it. It's about doing and it's about executing. And I think that's a beautiful thing that martial arts teaches us.
Yeah, I think it's all theory, right? We all had theories to talk about the UFC. We had a theory that this fighting style is going to beat this one, or this is going to be the way that, this kickboxer or this boxer with one glove on, his theory was I'm going to use one glove and this and that, whatever. Art Jimerson, that was funny. That always stands out to me. That guy, that's his like, he will be in martial arts history forever for that silliness. But his theory was maybe I'll protect one hand or whatever. But theory is one thing, and then experience is totally another. We can kind of, like you said, show people the light, show people the door, whatever. They got to walk through it. They got to go towards it. They have to figure it out on their own. And it may not be what they thought it was. It could be something totally different, but you have to experience it. That's the main thing. It goes from theory and experience. A lot of the stuff we talk about, I can't do this death touch on you, this theory of this death touch, because it could kill you. But you don't really see people doing that technique. Some of these techniques are all theory, right?
Right.
Hitting them in their gallbladder 26. It's theory. And then when you have two people in a cage, that's the experience. That's where you actually see it come to fruition, what's going to happen. And that's where, if we talk martial arts or talk jiu-jitsu on the mats is where, like, you can talk all this theory about this may work or this may not work. But when you go, and that's the beautiful thing about jiu-jitsu, we actually get to put our theories, our ideas into an actual experience, and we get to experience that and see what works on the mats and what doesn't. And that helps you create your other theories possibly. And the ball keeps rolling, keep doing it again and again. That's how we evolve essentially, and we grow is through experience.
That's right. And which leads to the last tip that we'll share with you guys, which is definitely something that I gained through experience. And that's learning how to train smart.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, right. So starting in my early 30s, I had to start adjusting my training. It was honestly probably my late 20s, because that late 20s was when I experienced a set of injuries that made me reevaluate why am I getting injured all the time? And in particular, not just me, but why are everybody else getting injured? Because I remember we were getting ready for a big competition. We had a big squad, and by the end of it, everybody was hurt, injured, straggling. You know what I mean? It wasn't good. Nobody went to that tournament 100%. We all went in there beat up, and we would have done better if we would have done more drilling and less rolling and things like that, and made our techniques more sharp. But instead, we beat the crap out of ourselves for 8 weeks, and then we rolled into the tournament. We all got pretty busted up. But this kind of goes back to when I was a young guy. All I wanted to do was train hard and go at it all the time, which is fine. It's you're a young person, you can take it. It's not a bad thing to do. And learning how to turn on that light switch and go hard, I think is one of the cool things that martial arts does teaches you. You learn how to tap into a different side of yourself. It's one of the reasons why I can be like, I remember my MMA fight days, I'd go out there and I would be literally 100% committed to maximum violence against the other person. And then as soon as, within the rules, of course, and then as soon as, there'd be times where I would be like hammer fisting someone's face, and then the ref would say stop, and it would be like turn off. You know, I'm in control of that side of myself. I can turn the switch up, I can turn the switch back off. But now as I'm getting older, and as I get older, it's fun to train hard, and I still go hard from times. But then there's a lot of times where I'll go light, or I'll just drill. In the result of this undulating up and down sort of nature of going hard some days, taking it easy some days, just drilling some days, and mixing it up and listening to my body, is that I have less injuries. I've been more consistent with my training, and I've had better performances in competition. So it's one of these things where back when I was younger, I would think that if I wasn't training hard all the time, that something was going to be bad. I would be negatively affected by it, but it's been quite the opposite. By not training hard all the time, I'm able to perform better, right? And again, it's not to say when I'm not training hard, I'm not training. I'm still training. I'm just training differently. And I think that it's one of those things where it's been very useful to me. And I don't think it's something that's only reserved for the aged. It's something that I think that if you're still a bit younger, you could still implement those strategies and prolong the use of your joints and your body and everything else. Because again, I promise you, if all you do is train hard all the time, you might be fine now. If you're young, you will run into some injuries at some point, and they'll probably start to pile up. Everything will be fine, and then all of a sudden one day, it's like your car all of a sudden has some rattling going on.
Yep.
You take it to the mechanic, they fix one thing. The next week, then they got to take it back. All of a sudden, they start to pile up, and you'll have this string of injuries that changes you, and you have to be mindful of it. And so my encouragement to you is, even if you're younger, be mindful. Listen to your body. Another thing that martial arts can teach you, right, is to be in tune with that thing that you're in, right? We all sort of deep down see ourselves as this little guy inside our head controlling the big flesh suit, right? As if there's some little tiny person up there in our heads driving this suit around like a robot. Well, when that robot starts to feel a little achy, when the robot's basically begging you because of pain or injuries or whatever to stop just a little bit, just take it easy, right? Take a day off, take a day of drilling only, those sort of things. It helps out big time. And again, you're not going to be negatively affected as much as you think, or in some cases not at all. And sometimes it'll be a positive benefit because your body will be more healthy and more able to recover from those injuries or from those hard training sessions that you've been having.
So don't ignore that check engine light.
That's right. That's right.
Like, don't take a piece of duct tape and put it over that and just ignore it, right? That means something's up, or it needs to be addressed, because things can get worse. And I always I always go back to that story, exactly what you're talking about. You started training smarter. You were still training hard. Just you would taper and kind of, go to the peak. Or you would learn how to get your body to peak at the right time. So for competition, you feel fresh, you feel sharp, you feel energized, you don't feel too beat up. And that's a science. Again, Chewy, like we talked about, it comes from experience. You have to experience of going into a tournament flat and tired and beat up versus, oh, wow. But I think there's also on the other side, we always hear about, you have to grind, you have to work so hard and leave no stone unturned kind of thing. And there's different ways to do that. Beating your body into the ground day in and day out, not allowing yourself to do the proper recovery, not focusing on that thing, not just adding more in. It's like, I've already got this crazy training schedule, I'm going to add more things in, like strength training and this and that. Well, you can do that, but you have to do it in an intelligent way, meaning, all right, well, I'm going to back off on the hard days of training until my body acclimates, and I'll work them back in. Doesn't mean you have to take them out forever. And there's ways to incorporate that. But when you're adding increased stress onto your body, something's going to give, something's got to give. And eventually as you get older, your body's a little less resilient to these increased stressors. So if you're going to add something new to your weekly routine, whether it's strength training or I'm going to do running miles or whatever it is, take some other area and maybe decrease it a little bit and let your body adjust and acclimate, and then start to incorporate your maybe tough training back in. I think it's just a good idea because people think you have to just quit doing what you're doing or stop this one thing to do this other. Well, if you taper the intensity, I think that's where you can kind of get away with still doing what you want to do, still getting that scratch that itch a little bit, but incorporating new things that might be beneficial, whether it's strength training, additional recovery, whatever you need to do to kind of get the most out of your body.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with grinding. It's just there's a time to grind and there's a time to not grind.
Yes, absolutely.
And you have to you have to respect the sort of the flows, the ups and downs of just nature in general. And so when you think about your body can grind, you can go hard. But if you're going to ask of yourself more, you should also, like, by training hard, the sort of pushing yourself, you should also ask yourself, well, what am I going to do in turn to help my body recover from these things? Am I going to do some post stretching to help loosen things up, to help, move the blood around, to help keep these muscles nice and loose and pliable? Am I going to make sure I get a little extra sleep tonight because I trained extra hard today? Like for me, like one of the things is on my harder days of training, I give myself a longer window of sleep time the next day to give myself, and again, not everybody can do that.
Right.
But again, if you can't do that, then you should probably be careful about always pushing yourself, right? Because again, you have to be able to give yourself something. A lot of bodybuilders that I talked to when I was young, in lifting circles, they would say that you don't grow in the gym, you grow in the bedroom, in the kitchen, right? We stimulate ourselves with the training. It's when we're in the recovery phase that we become stronger. It's in the recovery phase that our muscles actually grow.
Yep.
And even for what we do, we stimulate in the gym. It's when we get enough rest that those neuromuscular connections are made, right? It's when our brain can get nice, can get like its full rest and can clear out everything and can basically assimilate all those different lessons you've been learning and everything that's been going on. It's when you go through the strength training and everything else and you go back and you sleep and you eat some good food that your body can take that nourishment and it can turn it into stronger muscles and more resistant, a more resistant body and a more resilient body. It doesn't happen in the gym, and you can overdo it there. And just think of it this way too. Think of what you're doing as experiments. A lot of times people are afraid to try anything new or try anything different. They've done one thing and that's what they know. And so they don't want to do anything different, right? It's easy. It's complacent. You've got a little success with it. Maybe you've gotten a little bit better with it. So you don't want to change. So think of them as experiments. I remember the first time that I did not train for essentially 5 days leading up to a competition. I would drill and I would get a good sweat in. I would stretch, but I did not actually roll. No rolling for a jiu-jitsu competition. I remember it freaked me out a little bit. I was like, what? This feels really weird. I feel like I should be doing something more.
Yeah.
But I had read some different stuff from different sports and how they would lead up to a competition and how they would lead up to try to get the best out of themselves. And a lot of them, this is what they would do. They would take it off for almost a week to give themselves time to recover. And so I was doing this, and come the day of the competition, I felt amazing. I'd never had so much energy on the day of a competition. I had tons of matches and I felt just sharp. I felt on fire and I had a great success at the competition. And so to me, it was kind of validation, like, oh, this worked out. Now, had it not worked out, well, then I would just say, you know what? It's okay. It was just an experiment. It wasn't the only way that I could do it. I'm just experimenting. I'm trying things out. And again, just as we experiment with our techniques, we should be experimenting with our training. This is how we figure things out, right? If you search and maybe you find that some boxers who are getting paid millions and millions and millions of dollars are doing something, those people are making a lot of money to train these people. They probably have some good ideas to listen to. Even a basketball player. I don't really like basketball, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't learn something about the way that they're training people, right? The frequency at which they're training people. High level wrestling, Olympic wrestling programs. How do they train people? Are they just going live every single day in the gym? No, they're not usually. There's a lot of drilling that's involved. There's a lot of like drilling and situational things that are going on. seems like some good ideas to follow people that are some of the best athletes in the world and how they train. And they have these giant think tanks to try to bring our country to win more medals than the other country, right? So again, they've got a lot of people into it. And so if you find these ideas, don't be afraid to try them. Just experiment. And again, it's not the end of the world if it doesn't work. It's just an experiment. All right, guys. So that is the podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you got something from it. Just a handful of ideas to chew on for your own training. And again, as I talk about those things and as you listen to it, if something stood out to you, some ideas stood out to you, some sort of thing popped up into your brain to say, you know what, I should try this, then my encouragement to you is to get the experience and go out and actually do something with it. Don't just listen to the podcast and say, you know, that's really cool. That was enjoyable to hear about that. I want you to like go try to do stuff. That's my call to you, is to execute on things. Don't just be a collector of ideas, right? That sit on the shelf and collect dust, and you have lots of stuff to talk about. Go create experiences with them. Go do them. That's the important thing. That's the action part. That's the doing. The doing is so much more important than just simply thinking alone. So just to end it with that, guys, as always, thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. If you guys have never used them before, I encourage you to check them out. It's the CBD of my choice. Again, I personally like using it late at night, not late at night, but as I'm going to sleep, which is not late at night. I'm an old man, so I go to sleep fairly early. But I use it as part of my winding down nighttime routine to sort of help ease me off into sleep. And again, I feel like it helps provide me with some better sleep cycles. Seem to sleep a little bit better. But again, I like to encourage people to try it out for themselves to gain the experience, going back to the podcast, right? Rather than taking some, bearded assholes advice about taking supplements. Try it out for yourself and see what you think. Because originally I did not think CBD was much of anything. I didn't trust it. I thought it was snake oil. I tried some because a friend gave it to me and I was changed. I thought, oh man, this is actually something there. And then I got more interested in it. And so again, been using their products for several years. I like them. Check them out at charlottesweb.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off. Also, thanks to Matt at epicrollbjj.com. If you were looking for a new gear or a new gi, new rash guard, new shorts, new t-shirts, or you just want some cool jiu-jitsu stuff for yourself or for someone else, check out epicrollbjj.com. They've got great designs, high quality stuff. They've got my bearded approval. And again, you can check them out at their website, epicrollbjj.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu for 15% off. And if you guys want to support the podcast directly and get access to an exclusive library of content we've been making for the last several years, you can do so by going to the Patreon at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. There are some other perks that you can learn about by going there. But again, that tends to be the big draw, is the stuff that you get for joining. But again, check out the other perks on the website at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, if you guys would like to get my daily email that I send out, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join, JOIN. Upon joining, you'll get access to some ebooks that I give away for the email list. And then afterwards, you'll get my daily email, which can be everything from exclusive offers that I give away to philosophical ideas, to books I'm reading, to training tips. It's a bunch of different stuff. And again, you can get that at my website, chewjitsu.net/join. And you can unsubscribe at any time. So guys, thank you so much for being here with us, and we'll talk to you next time.